They fired me to dodge a $150,000 performance bonus. I spent 6 agonizing months writing the code that automated their entire national logistics grid, surviving on black coffee and spite. Management thought they could cut me loose right before the launch and keep my work for free, but they forgot one crucial detail. I built the system, and I took the keys with me. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories, with a very sincere thank you for your incredible support over the years. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, meaning we no longer have the operating budget to survive here. So we are forced to halt new video uploads on this platform for the foreseeable future and transition our operations entirely over to Patreon. If you enjoyed today's story, please consider supporting us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon page to listen to exclusive, true stories that are even better, significantly longer, and filled with explicit details we simply cannot publish on YouTube, all brought to life with multiple emotional voices in a single story. You can join us right now by scanning the Patreon QR code on your screen, or by clicking the link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Now, let us dive right into today's story, where you will meet a brilliant tech architect named Addison Alexander, as I tell you exactly how I engineered the ultimate payback. I am 32 years old, and until recently, I was the lead systems architect at Vanguard Freight Analytics down in Austin, Texas. My blood type was essentially cold brew coffee and spite by the time this nightmare started. I was drowning every single day in an absolute ocean of legacy spaghetti code, tasked with the monumental burden of single-handedly automating Vanguard's massive national logistics grid. The company wanted to launch a shiny new initiative they called Project Apex. It was supposed to be a revolutionary artificial intelligence-driven dispatch system that predicted supply chain failures before they even happened. Management dumped this broken, bloated prototype on my desk and gave me exactly 6 months to do what any sane software engineer would tell you is a solid 2-year job. And my elite strike team for this impossible mandate? I was given a grand total of 2 people. The first was a genuinely brilliant but clinically narcoleptic intern who would literally fall asleep at his keyboard while compiling code. The second was our senior database administrator, a guy who still used a physical flip phone and actually printed out his emails to read them at his desk. I was practically a one-woman army fighting a grueling war against terrible infrastructure. The only reason I agreed to this digital death march was a legally binding clause buried deep in my employment contract. If Project Apex launched on schedule and under budget by Q3, I was entitled to a performance bonus of $150,000. On top of that cash payout, I was guaranteed a promotion to Vice President of Engineering. That was the massive carrot on the stick keeping me going. $150,000 can buy a whole lot of peace of mind, and a Vice President title meant I would finally have the authority to stop fixing other people's garbage code. So, I sacrificed my entire personal life at the altar of logic and corporate profit. I gave up every single weekend for half a year. I completely canceled a heavily planned ski vacation to Aspen, eating the non-refundable deposits, just so I could stay at my desk. I practically moved into my cubicle under the harsh, flickering fluorescent lights, living off delivery food and pure adrenaline. I systematically ripped out and rewrote the fundamental routing algorithms from scratch, because the original math was a tragic joke. I patched massive, glaring security vulnerabilities that the previous developers had just slapped digital duct tape over, inch by agonizing inch. I turned a failing, miserable prototype into a genuine masterpiece of digital engineering. But just as the system started to shine, the corporate parasites began to circle. Enter Marcus. He was our newly hired Chief Operations Officer, a slick executive who wore perfectly tailored suits and spoke entirely in empty corporate buzzwords. He would walk into my server room and say things like, "We need to synergize our paradigms to maximize back-end bandwidth," despite never writing a single line of code in his entire life. And then there was Chloe. She was our project manager, a venomous corporate climber whose only verifiable technical skill was weaponizing the carbon copy function on emails to steal credit. If a deployment issue occurred, it was an engineering failure, and she made sure my name was highlighted for the blame. But if a breakthrough happened, she immediately sent a company-wide blast, starting with, "I am so proud to announce the success of my new initiative." She spent her days organizing useless alignment meetings while I spent my nights actually building the product. Despite their constant interference and suffocating micromanagement, I kept my head down. Against all absolute odds, I got Project Apex running flawlessly in the staging environment. We simulated thousands of complex freight routes, severe weather patterns, and spontaneous mechanical failures, and the system handled every single variable perfectly. The performance metrics were absolutely astounding, operating with a 99.9% efficiency rate. We were actually 2 weeks ahead of schedule and significantly under budget. The finish line was right there. The bonus was basically already sitting in my bank account, or at least, that is what I thought. The shift did not happen overnight. It was not a sudden explosion of hostility, but rather a slow, creeping freeze. You know the feeling. It is that subtle, agonizing shift in the atmospheric pressure of a corporate office when the herd realizes someone has been marked for slaughter. Exactly 5 weeks before the Q3 deadline, the digital invitations on my schedule simply began to evaporate. The weekly executive syncs regarding the project deployment were suddenly rescheduled, and my email address was conveniently left off the new distribution lists. Whenever I walked past the glass walls of the main conference rooms, I would see Marcus leaning over the polished oak tables, gesturing expansively to the board of directors. If he caught my eye through the glass, his gaze would slide right past me, completely devoid of recognition, as if I were nothing more than a piece of broken furniture. Then came the internal communications. Chloe sent out a glossy, company-wide newsletter detailing the final roadmap for the launch. In the second paragraph, she explicitly referred to the system as her personal brainchild. She wrote a sprawling, self-congratulatory essay about how she had conceptualized the architecture from the ground up, completely erasing my existence from the narrative. I tried to maintain my professionalism. I focused on the code, but when I identified a critical load balancing issue in the final server configuration, I requested an emergency meeting. Instead of Marcus or the engineering team, I was greeted by a sharply dressed human resources representative, holding a legal pad. When I tried to explain that the servers could overload during peak transit hours, the representative offered me a sickeningly sweet, rehearsed smile. "Take a step back, Addison," she said, her voice dripping with artificial empathy. "You have been working so incredibly hard these past few months. You are too close to the details. It is time to let leadership handle the vision from here. We need you to trust the process." That phrase was the absolute pinnacle of corporate gaslighting. They were not just ignoring my technical warnings, they were actively trying to make me feel unstable for raising them. But the final piece of the puzzle fell into place 2 days later, thanks to our senior database administrator. True to his analog nature, he had printed out a massive stack of database queries to review at his desk. Tucked accidentally in the middle of those pages was a forwarded email chain he had been blindly copied on. It was a direct exchange between Marcus and the chief financial officer. I read the printed words over and over, my blood turning to absolute ice. The subject line read, "Q3 budget restructuring." In the body of the email, Marcus casually proposed eliminating key architectural redundancies pre-launch in order to maximize shareholder optics and reduce overhead. He explicitly mentioned that terminating certain high-level engineering contracts before the official deployment date would legally void any pending performance payouts. They were not just taking my project, they were going to fire me right before the finish line to dodge my $150,000 bonus. I did not panic. I did not storm into the executive suites. I did not shed a single tear. I went back to my desk, put on my noise-canceling headphones, and I coded. If they wanted to play a game of corporate chess, I was going to flip the entire board over the next 72 hours, operating completely under the radar in the deepest, most restricted layers of the system architecture. I implemented something I called Directive 404. It was not malware. It was not a virus. It was a highly complex, decentralized anti-fraud protocol deeply embedded into the absolute core of the dispatch system. The beauty of Directive 404 was that it was entirely legal. I painstakingly documented every single line of its functionality in the technical appendix of a 600-page compliance manual that I knew for a fact no one in upper management would ever bother to read. The protocol was simple but devastating. It required the physical biometric token of the lead architect, which was me, to cryptographically authenticate the final transition from the staging environment to live production. My fingerprint, securely processed through the physical hardware key on my lanyard, was the only thing that could finalize the bridge between the code and the real-world trucks. I built the ultimate fail-safe. If management attempted to force the system to go live without this specific cryptographic handshake, the architecture would not simply fail to start. It was programmed to assume a hostile, unauthorized cyber takeover was occurring. In response to this perceived threat, the system would automatically and irreversibly quarantine the company's entire logistical network, locking down every single routing table and database server to prevent data theft. I woven my very existence into the DNA of the software. They wanted to launch without me, but I made absolutely sure that if they cut the architect, the building would lock its doors forever. The digital execution was scheduled with surgical precision. It arrived at exactly 4:45 in the afternoon on a Friday, exactly 10 days before the highly anticipated system launch. A generic calendar invitation materialized on my screen with a harsh, synthetic chime. The subject line read, "Quick connect with Marcus and Human Resources." Time immediately slowed down to a crawl. I accepted the invitation and watched the camera light blink green. The video grid populated. On the left was the same Human Resources representative from before, sitting in a sterile white room. On the right was Marcus, broadcasting from his corner office, wearing a dark navy blazer and a carefully practiced expression of solemn concern. The execution was heavily scripted, delivered with the soulless, rehearsed cadence of a corporate machine that had performed this exact ritual 1,000 times. The representative did most of the talking. She stared directly at her webcam, reading from a legal document just out of frame. She utilized all the standard industry terminology. She spoke about a shifting company culture. She mentioned an unfortunate but necessary restructuring of the engineering department to align with long-term strategic goals. She formally informed me that my position as lead systems architect was being terminated, effective immediately. Marcus leaned forward into his camera, steepling his fingers. He offered a tight, sympathetic nod that did not reach his cold eyes. "We really appreciate the heavy lifting you did in the early stages," Marcus said, his voice entirely devoid of actual gratitude. "But as you know, the business needs are evolving, and just to ensure all the paperwork is perfectly clear, since the system has not officially launched in the live environment, your performance bonus is null and void, according to Section 4 of your contract. I know it is tough timing, but our hands are tied by policy." I wanted a reaction. He wanted me to scream, to cry, to beg, or to threaten a lawsuit so he could justify the betrayal. I gave him absolutely nothing. My heart rate remained remarkably steady. The clinical detachment I used to debug broken code seamlessly took over my brain. I looked straight into the camera lens and asked exactly 3 clarifying questions. "What is the exact duration of the severance package?" I asked. 2 weeks of base pay," the representative answered, blinking in surprise at my calm demeanor. "Will my health insurance remain active until the end of the current month?" "Yes, it will." "Where is the digital non-disclosure agreement?" A link materialized in the chat box. I clicked it. I scrolled to the bottom of the document and applied my digital signature without breaking eye contact with Marcus on the screen. "Thank you for the clarification," I said. "Goodbye." I closed my laptop. The screen went black. The silence in my cubicle was absolute. Within 3 minutes, a young, jittery security guard appeared at the edge of my desk, holding a collapsed cardboard box. He looked terrified, clearly expecting me to cause a scene. I simply stood up and began organizing my belongings. I left the expensive company-issued laptop, the dual monitors, and the mechanical keyboard exactly where they were. I packed a few personal notebooks, a framed photograph, and my favorite coffee mug. Finally, I reached up to my neck and unclasped the company lanyard. The plastic ID badge dangled at the end. Attached right next to it was my physical biometric token, a small metal USB device I had purchased myself years ago. With a sharp, precise click, I unclipped the token from the company lanyard. It was my personal property, purchased with my own money. I dropped it into the bottom of my leather purse, placed the empty ID badge on the keyboard, and picked up my box. I allowed the nervous guard to escort me through the glass doors and out of the building. For the next 7 days, I completely vanished from the corporate world. I drove out to a luxury spa resort in the Texas Hill Country. I spent my mornings getting deep tissue massages and my afternoons lounging by a pristine infinity pool, drinking frozen margaritas. I left my phone on silent mode inside my canvas tote bag. Every few hours, the screen would light up with frantic, unread LinkedIn messages from my former intern. The preview notifications were desperate. He kept mentioning that the staging servers were starting to act incredibly weird, and that none of his administrative commands were working. I took another sip of my drink, closed my eyes, and let the warm Texas sun wash over me. The countdown had officially begun. Launch day arrived with the kind of sickening corporate fanfare usually reserved for a tech billionaire going to space. Back at the Vanguard headquarters, the main lobby had been transformed into a massive press arena. Through the grapevine of industry contacts, I later heard exactly how the grand illusion played out. Marcus had set up a towering, high-definition light-emitting diode screen right behind a temporary stage. I was standing there in a fresh, custom-tailored charcoal suit, holding a crystal flute of expensive champagne. A crowd of logistics journalists, local politicians, and major investors were gathered around, listening to him deliver a profoundly arrogant speech. He took absolute and total credit for the revolutionary architecture, praising his own visionary leadership for bringing the project across the finish line. At the center of the stage, sitting on a clear acrylic podium, was a single ceremonial laptop. Chloe stood next to it, beaming at the cameras, soaking in the flashing lights. As the digital clock on the massive screen ticked down to 0, Marcus raised his glass to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced, his voice echoing through the lobby speakers, "welcome to the future of global freight." Chloe dramatically slammed her hand down on the deployment key. For exactly 3 seconds, it was an absolute triumph. The massive screen flashed a brilliant, vibrant green. Hundreds of digital supply lines illuminated across the map of the United States. The crowd erupted into loud applause. Marcus took a victorious sip of his champagne, and then Directive 404 woke up. Deep within the server architecture, the system scanned the incoming deployment command. It looked for the mandatory cryptographic handshake. It reached out for the physical biometric token of the lead systems architect. It found absolutely nothing but empty digital space, operating exactly as it was programmed to do under the threat of an unauthorized intrusion. The protocol violently slammed the heavy iron doors shut. The applause in the lobby died instantly as a deafening, dissonant error klaxon blared through the overhead speakers. The brilliant green map on the giant screen suddenly shattered into static before going entirely black. A single, massive red padlock icon materialized in the center, pulsing like a slow, angry heartbeat. The blackout was instantaneous and catastrophic. Across the entire country, every single freight truck in the national fleet had its routing data completely wiped from the cabin displays. Drivers cruising down major interstates suddenly found their dispatch terminals entirely blank. Inside the massive regional distribution warehouses, hundreds of automated sorting robotics abruptly froze in place mid-motion, dropping packages and blocking the conveyor belts. The entire nervous system of the company was severed in a fraction of a second. Panic erupted. The press conference dissolved into shouting as Marcus dropped his champagne glass, shattering it across the stage. He and Chloe sprinted away from the cameras, bursting through the glass doors of the engineering war room. They were sweating, screaming at the few remaining engineers to fix the glitch. Chloe shoved the clinically narcoleptic intern out of his chair and began violently typing on his terminal, desperately trying to roll back the deployment code to the previous version. But the anti-fraud quarantine had already locked them entirely out of all administrative privileges. They had zero access. In a state of sheer, blind panic, Marcus ordered a senior network engineer to forcefully hack into their own database to bypass the lockout. That was a spectacular mistake. The moment the system detected the brute force database intrusion, a secondary security protocol automatically triggered. Recognizing a severe escalation in the supposed cyber attack, the system initiated an aggressive financial lockdown. Within 30 seconds, every single corporate expense account, executive credit card, and vendor payment gateway was frozen solid to prevent the imagined hackers from siphoning company funds. Marcus literally locked himself out of his own money while trying to break into my code. As the chaos raged, an older veteran information technology technician calmly dug into the raw system logs. He traced the quarantine trigger back to its source. He printed out a specific page from the deeply buried compliance manual and handed it to Marcus. The twisted truth finally dawned on the room. The system was not broken at all. It was not a glitch, and it was not a virus. The software was performing flawlessly, executing exactly as it was designed to protect the company from unauthorized access. The manual clearly stated that firing the lead architect before deployment without properly transferring the biometric security credentials constituted a critical security breach. They had triggered the trap themselves. The inevitable surrender approached like a freight train. Millions of dollars in perishable goods were currently stranded on sweltering highways. The customer service phone lines were completely jammed with furious clients threatening massive, company-ending lawsuits. The stock price was already beginning to hemorrhage in the afternoon trading session. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Marcus was standing in the center of the war room, his tailored suit completely drenched in nervous sweat, staring at the flashing red padlock on the monitors. He realized with absolute crushing certainty that all the corporate buzzwords in the world could not write a single line of bypass code. He had only one option left. He had to pick up his phone and call the woman he had just fired. I was sitting at a quiet outdoor cafe tucked away in the hills, sipping a beautifully extracted double espresso. The morning air was crisp, a perfect contrast to the absolute nightmare I knew was unfolding miles away. When my phone began vibrating aggressively against the marble tabletop, I did not rush. The caller identification displayed a frantic succession of digits originating from the Vanguard executive suite. I let it ring 4 times, taking one last, slow sip of my coffee, before I finally swiped the screen to answer. "Hello, Marcus," I said, my voice perfectly level and completely detached. I could practically hear the man sweating through the cellular receiver. His breathing was ragged, and the background noise sounded exactly like a chaotic, crashing stock exchange. "Addison, hi," Marcus panted, desperately attempting to inject a tone of casual familiarity into his trembling voice. "Listen, we are experiencing a very minor deployment glitch with the new architecture. Just a tiny snag in the staging to live transition. I know we had a bit of a misunderstanding last Friday, but I was hoping I could ask you for a really quick favor, just to get us over this tiny bump." A tiny bump. That was what he was calling a nationwide total paralysis of a multi-billion-dollar logistics network. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. "I am no longer an employee of Vanguard," I replied, slicing right through his desperate rambling. "I am a private citizen enjoying a very expensive vacation. Addison, please, I am begging you. The trucks are completely down. The warehouses are locked tight. We need your biometric access credentials right now, or we are going to lose our biggest clients. If you require my professional technical services to resolve your crisis, you will have to hire me as an independent consultant," I said calmly. "I am sending a pre-drafted independent contractor agreement to your personal email right now." I tapped a button on my tablet, firing off the legal document I had meticulously prepared days before they even fired me. "Open it," I commanded. I heard the furious, panicked clicking of a mouse on his end. Then, a sharp, ragged intake of breath. "Addison, this is absolutely outrageous," Marcus gasped, his voice cracking. "You are demanding $10,000 an hour?" "With a minimum of 20 hours billed entirely up front," I clarified, enunciating every single syllable, "plus a non-negotiable system recovery fee of $150,000. which conveniently matches the exact amount of the performance bonus you and the finance department tried to steal from me. The total amount must be wired directly into my checking account immediately, until my bank confirms the funds have cleared. My physical token stays right here in my purse, and your entire national fleet stays rotting on the asphalt. We cannot just authorize that kind of money without an emergency board approval, he yelled, finally dropping the friendly facade. Then you better get them on the phone, I said, because every single hour you delay is costing the company millions in penalty fees. Have a lovely afternoon, Marcus. I ended the call and placed the phone face down. It took exactly 14 minutes for the bank notification to illuminate my screen. The wire transfer had cleared perfectly. The funds were secured. They had completely caved. I drove back into the city, changing into a flawless, sharp black designer trench coat and a pair of stiletto heels that clicked with absolute, intimidating authority against the pavement. When I pushed through the revolving glass doors of the Vanguard headquarters, the lobby looked like an active war zone. Dozens of logistics brokers were screaming into their headsets. Investors were pacing frantically in circles, and security guards were desperately trying to maintain some semblance of order. But as I walked across the polished marble floor, the noise seemed to physically part around me. People stopped shouting and just stared. I moved through the absolute chaos like Moses parting the Red Sea, my expression an unreadable mask of total dominance. I bypassed the main reception desk, ignored the frantic waves from my former intern, and took the private executive elevator straight to the top floor. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the main boardroom without knocking. The air inside was thick with sheer panic and stale sweat. Marcus was pacing the length of the room, completely disheveled, his expensive tie pulled loose. Chloe was sitting at the massive conference table, hyperventilating into her hands, her carefully crafted corporate persona entirely shattered. Spread around them were the 5 senior members of the board of directors, all looking like they were about to face a firing squad. You are here, Marcus exhaled, rushing toward me like a drowning man grasping for a lifeline. Thank God. Please, sit down. Let us get you logged into the mainframe. I will stand, I said coldly, brushing past him. I walked directly to the head of the long table, where a master administrative terminal had been hastily set up. I opened my purse, retrieved my personal biometric token, and plugged it directly into the secure port. The terminal immediately recognized the hardware, prompting me for a final authorization key. Unlock it, the chief executive officer barked from the other end of the table, his face purple with rage. Unlock the damn trucks right now. I will unlock the network in a moment, I said, my fingers hovering gracefully over the keyboard. But first, I think the board of directors needs to understand exactly why this lockdown happened in the first place. I executed a rapid command sequence. The massive projector screen at the front of the boardroom hummed to life, casting a harsh white glow over the terrified executives. I bypassed the locked deployment screen and brought up the raw, unfiltered back-end system logs from the night before the launch. I highlighted a very specific, heavily encrypted string of unauthorized code modifications. My security protocol did not just trigger because my biometric credentials were missing, I announced, projecting my voice clearly across the dead silent room. It triggered because someone attempted a massive internal financial breach. If you look closely at these timestamps, you will see that at 11 o'clock last night, your visionary project manager, Chloe, tried to secretly alter the core financial routing algorithms. Chloe's head snapped up, her eyes wide with sheer terror, her face draining of all color. She attempted to rewrite the automated vendor payment scripts to siphon a 2% consulting fee off every single freight transaction, I continued, highlighting the destination bank routing numbers in bright red on the giant screen. And she was trying to funnel those millions of dollars into a dummy shell company registered strictly under her own name. The absolute silence that followed my revelation was completely deafening. It was the kind of quiet where you could hear the air conditioning humming through the vents. All 5 members of the board of directors slowly turned their heads in perfect unison to stare directly at Chloe. She was practically shrinking into her expensive leather chair, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, unable to form a single coherent word of defense. The raw data on the giant projector screen was indisputable. The architecture did exactly what I designed it to do, I explained, letting the heavy reality of the situation sink into their minds. It detected a massive, unauthorized financial anomaly in the core routing algorithms. Chloe was actively attempting to embezzle company funds on the very eve of the launch. Directive 404 caught her. And the only reason the entire national network completely locked down was because Marcus decided to fire the single person on this planet who possessed the security clearance to override the quarantine protocol. You handed the executioner a blade, and you ended up cutting off your own head. I turned my back to the stunned executives and faced the master terminal. I pressed my thumb against the cool glass sensor of my physical token. The screen flashed, prompting me for the master encryption key. I did not need to look at my notes. I typed out the 32-character alphanumeric sequence entirely from memory, the rhythmic clacking of the mechanical keyboard echoing sharply in the tense room. I hit the enter key. Instantly, the flashing red padlock on the main screen dissolved. A wave of brilliant, vibrant green washed over the digital map of the United States. The error alarms in the engineering war room downstairs abruptly ceased. Through the floorboards, we could almost feel the massive machinery of the company waking up. The automated warehouse robotics resumed their sorting. The dispatch screens in thousands of truck cabins illuminated with fresh routing data. The national fleet was finally moving again. I had saved their system. The fallout was immediate and absolutely brutal. The chief executive officer stood up, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He pointed a shaking finger at the door. "Get out," he roared at Chloe. Within 2 minutes, corporate security entered the boardroom. Chloe was sobbing uncontrollably, her carefully crafted facade entirely destroyed, as the guards firmly escorted her out of the room and out of the building forever. The chief executive officer then turned his wrath toward Marcus, who was visibly trembling. Marcus was immediately stripped of his chief operations officer title and placed on an indefinite, unpaid administrative leave pending a massive forensic financial audit of every single project he had ever touched. With the immediate threat neutralized, the chief executive officer took a deep breath, trying to smooth his tie and compose himself. He looked at me with a desperate, pleading expression. "Addison," he began, his voice dripping with sudden, artificial respect. "What happened here today was an unprecedented failure of management, and I personally apologize. We need you. I am officially offering you the Vice President of Engineering role right now. We will completely double your previous salary, grant you full stock options, and give you absolute autonomy over the entire technology division. Please, stay." I reached down and smoothly unplugged my biometric token from the terminal, dropping it back into my purse. I reached into my trench coat pocket, pulled out a single sheet of heavy stock paper, and slid it across the polished oak table. It was the finalized, printed invoice for my consulting services, marked paid in full. "I appreciate the offer," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "But I do not work for liabilities. Goodbye." I turned on my heel and walked out of the boardroom, never looking back. Fast forward exactly 6 months. The Texas heat is a distant memory. I am currently standing on a brilliantly lit stage in the heart of Silicon Valley, wearing a sharp, tailored blazer. I am no longer an overworked employee drowning in legacy code. I am the founder and chief executive officer of my very own artificial intelligence logistics startup. The auditorium is packed with investors and industry leaders as I proudly announce our very first major enterprise client. It is a massive, multinational shipping conglomerate, which also happens to be Vanguard Freight Analytics' absolute biggest market rival. I look directly into the flashing cameras of the tech journalists and smile a genuine, triumphant smile. They are paying me millions of dollars for the exact same predictive dispatch system I built in that miserable cubicle. But there is one massive difference this time around. This time, I own the company, and I hold the keys. Thank you so much to everyone for tuning in and listening to my story today. I would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please let me know down in the comments. If you found today's story entertaining and satisfying, I have an important favor to ask. As I mentioned earlier, YouTube has unfortunately demonetized our channel, meaning we have absolutely no budget to continue operating here. We are forced to stop uploading new videos on this platform and will be transitioning our operations entirely over to Patreon. Please help us survive by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel. There, you can listen to the absolute best, highly detailed, and exclusive true stories that are simply too intense to publish on YouTube. You can join right now by scanning the Patreon QR code on your screen or by using the link provided in the description and the pinned comment below. Thank you again for your incredible support, and I will see you over on Patreon.